Now, before we actually get to solving problems involving trig, we actually need to learn a bit of terminology. Now, in mathematics, there's a few extra terms and words that we need to be aware of, and in trigonometry, there's two terms we're going to be talking about. Here, they're called angles of elevation and depression. Angles of elevation and depression. Now, I have a diagram over here, and so what we're imagining is we have two friends, A and B. We can call them any random name. We could call this one Andrew, and this one can be called Bob. Now, Andrew and Bob are two friends, and they see Andrew is down at the bottom on the road, and he's looking up at the building, and on the top of the building, there is Bob. Bob is looking down at Andrew from the top of the building. Now, when they look at each other, we can see they make eye contact. And let me just try to draw that again, a little bit cleaner. So they make eye contact. And we can draw a straight line between them. And what we can describe this straight line and the angle that this line makes with the horizontal along where the ground where Andrew is. So we can there's horizontal here. There's a special term for this angle down here when Andrew is looking up at Bob. But there's also another special way that we can describe the angle that Bob looks down at Andrew from up here. So here, Bob is looking down at Andrew at a particular angle as well, and we have special terms for that. Let's start from Andrew's perspective. Now, when Andrew is looking, he's looking up at Bob. He's looking up at Bob. So we call this angle going up from the horizontal, and this is a theta. And we call this angle over here, this angle is called an angle of elevation. So here I'm going to label this one. This is called an angle of elevation. So an angle of elevation is when you're looking from the horizontal. So the horizontal is that red dotted line that I drew at the bottom. And you're looking up at something. That is called an angle of elevation. So when you're looking up at someone, so when Andrew is looking up at Bob, that is an angle of elevation. So that angle there, from the horizontal up, is called an angle of elevation. Now, also said that Bob is looking down at Andrew. Now, where we place this angle is over here, between the horizontal line where Bob is, down towards Andrew. So this angle theta here, this has a special name, and this is called an angle of depression. So this is an angle of depression. So if you're looking down from somewhere, from your horizontal point, looking down, that is called an angle of depression. And so Andrew is looking up at Bob at an angle of elevation, and Bob is looking down at Andrew at an angle of depression. So these are two terms we need to be aware of. Now, if you have a look at this diagram, these two angles are actually the same value. They actually have the same value. And there's a reason for that. If you remember from last year, at the beginning of the year, we looked at a thing called angle relationships. Now, if you have a look here, when we highlight, let me just highlight this angle here. The angle that we see here between Bob and Andrew, it makes a Z shape. So these two angles here, in particular this one here and this one here, they form in this Z shape. And we call these alternate angles. Now, alternate angles, if they're on parallel lines, are equal. So these two angles, they actually turn out to be equal in value. And that's going to be a very important fact that we're going to use when we're solving these problems. So let's just recap. Angle of elevation is when you're looking up. So Andrew looking up at Bob is an angle of elevation. An angle of depression is when you're looking down towards something, and that is like when Bob is looking down at Andrew. So an angle of depression is when you're looking down, angle of elevation is when you're looking up. And both of these angles have the same value when you draw on a triangle in the diagram because they are alternate angles. Because they are alternate angles, they're going to have the same value. And that's going to be that's an important fact we're going to be using later in these questions. So let's have